I recently had some friends over for dinner, and I wanted to make something that took a little bit of time and effort and made it worthwhile. So I decided to do a sort of traditional but also non-traditional taco night, where I made some tacos al pastor, as well as some various side items that mostly were all made from scratch. So I'm just going to show you everything I did, and hopefully this can inspire you with some of your own ideas to do your own dinner party. So I actually don't have my own recipe for al pastor. I used the one from this YouTube channel, Jauja Cocina Mexicana, which I will link below. It's an amazing recipe. I've done it a couple times, and I actually have my own technique, which I'm going to show you at the end, and I think it makes it a little better. But long story short, it involves toasting a handful of chiles along with some aromatics, and then steeping them for a few minutes in some apple cider vinegar and water. After a few minutes, we blend that together with a seasoning mix that consists of some whole spices that we ground in a molcajete. That becomes our marinating paste for the pork. And speaking of pork, I'm using this big pork shoulder that I had in my freezer and cutting a bunch of nice thin slices so that they cook faster. I salted them all first and then thoroughly applied the paste to each one, and then put them all in a casserole dish to rest overnight. The next day I just got as many cast irons as I have heating up so I could do this as quickly as possible. I still have some pork fat from the banh mi video that I made, so I started with some of that here, but neutral oil works as well. I also added about a half of a sliced white onion here because I like how it caramelizes with the pork. My goal here was not to cook everything all the way through. I was just getting a good sear on both sides of the pork, and then I set everything aside. Preferably you can keep it warm in an oven set to its lowest temperature. I got all my seared pork onto a cutting board, and then I'm just dicing everything into pretty sizable chunks. These are going to be fitting onto some small street tacos, so go at your own discretion here. Now, as a last step before serving, I think this technique really brings everything to life, especially for all of us who don't have the traditional spit to make the al pastor, or even a grill because I don't have one of those either. I'm using a wok and flipping over my stove grates because that allows the flames to lick up over it better. I'm just getting that super hot and adding just a bit of neutral oil and then dumping about half my pork in at a time, and then I just vigorously toss with some chunks of pineapple for about 2 minutes or so. I'm just trying to finish cooking the pork through while getting some charred bits around each and every chunk that we cut. I really found that this does a pretty good job of imitating those crispy pork chunks that you find in Mexico in their tacos al pastor. Once it's done, you can put everything back into the oven at the lowest temperature, or you can serve right away. But for now, let's get on to the rest. I'm going to show you all one of the most American ways to do taco night, and that's by turning things into ranch. We're just going to make a simple avocado ranch as well as a chipotle ranch because I think their fattiness adds the perfect amount of richness to a taco like this. I'm really sorry, Mexico. Please forgive me. But yeah, for sauces like this, I don't really like to measure things. I'd rather just taste as I go, but I'll just put some guesstimates down in the description. I'm starting with the juice from about half of a lime as well as about equal parts of sour cream and mayo. I'm just doing one whole ripe avocado for this. It'll give you plenty of servings. I'm also adding in a few stems of cilantro as opposed to the leaves because the stems have a lot of flavor, and when you're blending them up it doesn't really matter, so I'm saving the leaves more for garnish. I'm pressing in 1 clove of garlic and a quick splash of white vinegar for some citrus-free acidity. I'm also adding in some dried dill, parsley, and chives. You could also use the fresh ones and it would probably taste a little better, but I just don't always like to go buy the fresh packs. I'm also doing a little garlic powder and a little dried marjoram. Just finish with a little salt and pepper and then blend up and start to taste. You can adjust texture by thinning it out with more vinegar or lime juice, or I'm using almond milk. You could use dairy milk instead. And for taste, you can adjust seasoning as needed, at least with a little more salt, but you can do more dried spices if you feel it needs it, more lime juice if you want it more acidic, etc. I want mine to have sort of a pourable consistency so it flows out of my squeeze bottle pretty easily, which, speaking of, I'm just grabbing a funnel and dumping this into my squeeze bottle because I think that's the easiest and coolest way to serve it. That should keep in the fridge for like a week, and we'll move on to the chipotle ranch. This one is very similar with almost identical ingredients. I'm starting with lime juice and mayo and sour cream again, but instead of avocado, I'm doing about 2 chipotles and adobo, the same dried dill, parsley, chives, marjoram, and garlic powder, as well as salt and pepper. Again, you're going to blend here and taste. I found this one is a little more runny than the avocado ranch because the avocado is a little thicker and the chipotles are more watery. You can adjust that by adding more sour cream or mayo to thicken it up, but I thought it was fine like this. Again, just dumping this into another squeeze bottle, and now you have 2 luscious toppings that you can put on your tacos or really anything else that you like to eat. Now, this is a good time to break in with the drink we're going to serve with all this. You definitely don't have to do this, but this is a good way to change things up. We're going to be making a hibiscus tea, or jamaica. It's got a lovely sour and fruity taste, and when you add a bunch of sugar, it tastes amazing. This was one of the most refreshing things I had when I visited Mexico. The weather was kind of hot, so the street vendors were selling really big cups of this, and it was just the perfect way to cool down after walking around the city all day. So I'm going to start with about a gallon of water that I'm going to start bringing to a boil. I'm adding a cup of sugar to start. We can adjust the rest of the sweetness later. I'm also adding some fresh slices of ginger, as well as a Mexican cinnamon stick and a handful of allspice. Once it's boiling, I'm going to kill the heat and add about 2 cups of dried hibiscus leaves, which you can find at your local Hispanic market. I'm going to stir it real quick and then cover everything for about 30 minutes to let everything steep. Afterwards, I'm just going to dump everything into a strainer over a bowl, and I'm just going to try to press the rest of that tea out of the leaves. Then you can transfer that into a pitcher and then add as much sugar as you'd like. I usually start with about a cup, but I don't add the rest until I cool it completely in the fridge because that's how I'm going to be tasting it. I know some people won't like this drink, but I think it's really good, so I think it's worth a try. Moving on to some Salsa Roja. I think roasting your vegetables for the salsa is always superior, and it's really easy to do. I'm first cutting 6 Roma tomatoes in half, as well as 1 jalapeno cut in half. I'd say like 5 to 7 garlic cloves and 1 whole white onion that I've cut into quarters. I'm putting those on a foil-lined baking sheet and then coating them in just a little bit of olive oil to help with the browning. And then I put them in my oven set to broiler on high. I try to rotate the tray every so often and try to move it around to get everything evenly heated. Then after like 5 to 10 minutes, you should have all this charring on your vegetables. Some of them might char faster than the others, and you can just remove those and keep cooking the rest. But you're just looking for these black bits all over the surface. That's going to provide us with a lot of roasted flavor. I like to do this in a food processor, but I also like to keep back half of the tomato and onion because I like to chop those by hand and more precisely affect the texture of the salsa. When I do everything in the food processor, it never comes out chunky enough, no matter how precise and careful I try to be. Into the food processor, I also add about a teaspoon of whole cumin seeds, maybe a teaspoon or so of caldo de pollo powder, a generous amount of salt and pepper, as well as the juice of half of a lime, and then a few more stems of cilantro and some of their leaves as well as 1 more chipotle and adobo, and then I just pulse that a few times to get everything blended. Again, I don't care too much about consistency because I'm going to adjust that with the hand chopped vegetables, which I will chop by hand, as well as a little bit of the cilantro leaves that I held back because I like to add those for garnish. Then I'm just going to add all that in and remove the blade and then just mix everything by hand, and then I just taste for seasoning. I usually need a good bit more of salt and sometimes more lime juice, but ultimately I don't like to finish tasting for seasoning until it's fully cooled in the fridge because I feel like letting it sit for a few hours changes the flavor just a little bit. So I just pack that in a bowl and let it sit in the fridge. We're getting close. Next up we have an amazing homemade guacamole, which for me, using one of these molcajetes is non-negotiable because it's definitively the best way to make guacamole. As Kenji says, pounding these into a paste is the best way to rupture the most cell walls, therefore releasing the most flavor from these vegetables, better than a knife or food processor could ever do. I start by finally dicing up a jalapeno and half of a white onion and roughly chopping up a handful of cilantro. A lot of people use red or yellow onion instead for guacamole because they have less of bite to them, but since I had white onion for everything else in this recipe, I'm just going to use it for this. So to remove some of the bite, I'm putting the diced onion into a strainer and then running cold water over it for a few seconds. This is going to brush off a lot of that abrasive onion flavor, which we don't want in the guacamole. Then back to the molcajete, I'm just putting in the whole jalapeno and then about half of the diced onion and half of the cilantro, as well as a generous pinch of salt, and then I'm just going to pound away. I alternate between up and down pounding and then swirling around the sides of it. This part takes a few minutes and a lot of work, but you want to make sure you break up this as much as possible because it's going to release the most flavor. Once you're satisfied with the consistency, you can add your avocados. I'm using 6 here, which is kind of a lot, but I have a big molcajete and I have friends that really like guacamole. You could probably get away with like 3 to 5 here. I kind of pre-chop mine and then scoop them in so it's easier to incorporate everything. I like to pound them just a bit but keep them kind of chunky because that's how I like my guac. Afterwards, you can add in the rest of the chopped onion and cilantro, as well as more salt and lime as needed as you taste for seasoning. I also like to add a pinch of cumin to my guac because I think it adds a flavor that enhances things but isn't overly noticeable. I also like to make this the same day that I'm serving it because any longer in the fridge and it starts to brown. But to assist with the browning, I'm going to get some plastic wrap and press it directly onto the top of the guac, making sure it's in contact with everything. That's going to reduce the contact that it has with the air, and it's going to oxidize less and brown less. Just keep this in the fridge as well. Okay, our final component for taco night is our homemade corn tortillas. And this one is quite simple. I'm just taking 600 grams of masa flour and 750 grams of warm water. I'm also adding a couple of hefty pinches of salt and then just mixing everything with a fork until I can eventually mix it with my hands and try to make it into one cohesive ball, and then just rest that for like 10 minutes under a towel to let everything hydrate. And then using a kitchen scale, we're just going to portion it into like 40-gram sized balls and then put that onto a wax paper lined baking sheet. Again, we just keep everything under a damp towel until we use it so that it doesn't dry out. But when you're ready to go, you're just going to use a tortilla press or just a heavy bottom pot and just press out your tortillas one by one. And I have multiple cast iron skillets going on medium-high heat, so I can do this quickly. You're just going to heat each tortilla through on each side, flipping about every 15 seconds or so. You're just looking for these charred bits on both sides. That's going to give you some flavor and texture that you want. Mine took between 1 to 2 minutes each. I'm keeping mine in my tortilla warmer, which is not big enough to keep this huge stack of like 30 tortillas, but I'm just going to use a towel to wrap everything up and just put it in my microwave to keep it kind of enclosed. They'll stay warm for like an hour or two while you prep everything else. But yeah, that's all of our components. All you have to do is kind of set everything out and let everyone assemble their own tacos. The one thing I didn't make from scratch was the tortilla chips, which are always better made from scratch, or at least frying the store-bought tortillas. But I think I already had enough going on, so store-bought chips was fine here. I also put out some chopped white onion and cilantro as well as some lime wedges so everyone can garnish their own tacos as desired. Just have them grab their tortillas and then add their meat and then add whatever sauces they want on top as well as their garnishes, and then as much guac and salsa as they want as well as some chips. And of course, don't forget about our jamaica. I thought this whole thing came out amazing and my friends enjoyed it. Each component was flavored deeply on its own. We spent a lot of time on it, so it shows here. Your friends will always appreciate when you spend a lot of time on them like this. And if you like cooking, it's a win-win. Unfortunately, I didn't film a taste test here, which is the best part of the videos, but I didn't want to ruin time with friends, so I think you understand. All the ingredients and references for these recipes are listed below in the description. I hope you can try something from this. You'll really love it. Thank you guys for watching and see you next time.